Living well for me means paying attention, um, and paying attention on purpose. And thirdly, in the present moment, and to do so non-judgmentally. And so to be, for me, living well is to be in this world, in this time, and in community, and do so in a way that calls me to pay attention to the day-to-day things, being present with you right now, paying attention to this, an experience of being in relation to you, and doing so purposefully, and being in the present moment to start with.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is Dr. Ed Taylor. Ed is Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Academic Affairs at the University of Washington, where he oversees educational opportunities that advance and deepen the undergraduate academic experience. Active in local and global communities, Ed is a founding board member of Rainier Scholars, on the board of Seattle Foundation, a trustee of Gonzaga University, and a member of the University Council of the United States International University, Africa. Throughout his career, Ed has focused his leadership on equitable access to opportunities and belonging in education. He is a professor in the College of Education, and his Ph.D. is from the University of Washington. Hi, Ed. How are you doing?
It's good to see you, Broderick. I'm doing quite well. It's July 3rd, and it's sunny outside, and I'm in Seattle, so it's wonderful.
Right. It's hot down here in California, and it's usually never hot around 4th of July. So I'm enjoying it because I'm from South Carolina, and my bones are just used to the heat at this time of the year. So I know the rest of my neighbors are like, oh God, this is torture. And I'm over here like, oh, this is great. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Your background in education, your interest in education, I think is so important. I consider myself an educator at the end of the day, and my love for learning and my love for helping others learn is such an important piece of the equation. And I think this podcast is an educational podcast where we're having conversations and focusing our attention on what it means to live well, to have a good life, just exploring different perspectives on that. And I consider that an educational process. So I did read that, but I also like to ask guests to share a little bit about themselves, however they like to, in this moment.
Well, first of all, I just want to say you just gave a beautiful definition of education, of being with others, of learning and helping others learn and finding joy in all of that. That's a wonderful definition. You sound like a teacher. In that respect, we should all be educators, right?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So thanks for the introduction. I'm not someone that puts great value in titles or even resumes for that matter, because we spend too much time trying to build the resume rather than trying to live the lives that are worthy of it, of being documented. Right?
Yeah.
So I think your question was, what does it mean to live well?
Yeah, well, we're going to get there, actually. Okay. But just to introduce yourself, any other things you want to add to that bio? I think that says it, but...
Yeah, I think for me, it's not so much what's been accomplished, but the process of getting here for me has been something that I keep track of. I'm from a community where not many of us, from a working class high school, and by working class I mean, not a lot of us are expected to go on to college. And in fact, some of us who did surprised some of those that would have predicted otherwise. First in my family to have gone on to a university, and I was fortunate enough to have earned a basketball scholarship to go to Gonzaga University, and that was a lovely thing. But it created an opportunity for me that an opportunity and a certain insight that when I got to Gonzaga, it became clear to me that I had been prepared for something different than going to college. And many of my classmates had been prepped. So that's where I learned about prep schools. I had no idea what a prep school was until I was in class in statistics with some of my fellow students and reading theology texts, Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Letters and Papers from Prison. I'm looking around the class and wondering, how did these people learn all of this stuff? How did they learn what a final exam was? How did they learn what a midterm exam was? And I realized they had been prepped for this experience and I had not. So I had to figure out how to be in that place in that moment in time, or exit, to be responsible and say, I either have to figure out how to do this and how to be here, or I have to find a way to leave, and try to do so with my dignity. And so I stayed and learned a lot about myself in the process. And Gonzaga is a Jesuit school in Spokane, Washington, a place that I would not have aspired to be, but boy, did I learn a lot about myself in relation to a community of people that I came to really care about and came to love. So, and I eventually ended up working in a university setting of all things, and I've come to love that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a very interesting background. I have a very similar background where I don't think any people expected me to go off and go to school. I didn't really. I had never been on a university campus, so it blew my mind. It was just 2 hours away from my home, but I was just like, oh wow, this is a different universe. Really opened me up, and I think it kind of spawned this podcast. As I sit back and reflect on it, and knowing that I grew up in a very small rural town and didn't know a lot about anything. And going off to school just opened me up to so much about the world that I had no idea existed. So,
And isn't
yeah.
that interesting, Broderick? And when you get access to it, not only should it not be privilege and elite and for the few, you get there and you think this should be for all of us to actually have space and time and text and opportunity with each other to just think about and wrestle with the big questions that matter in our time. And that should be an invitation to more and more of us not to be exclusive. But you think these are really amazing opportunities to sit around the question of what does it mean to live well? What does it mean to live in relation to others? What does it mean to move through life with integrity? And these big questions. What does it mean to find vocation, meaningful work, and contribute to the world? I mean, these are things that we should all be engaging in. And so in some ways, I was happy to be in it, but I also wanted to blow the doors open and say, let's all be in this. Let's all wrestle
Mm-hmm.
with these texts. Let's create new text. And so it's wonderful and exciting and a beautiful thing if done well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just segue perfectly into the question. What does living well mean to you? And I would love to, we'll just unpack that as we go in this conversation.
Yeah. Um, what is living well? That's such a there's so much in that question. But I think about John Kabat-Zinn and others who study and talk about mindfulness, and the concept seems pretty straightforward yet profound. Um, but living well for me means paying attention, um, and paying attention on purpose, and thirdly, in the present moment, and to do so non-judgmentally. And so to be, for me, living well is to be in this world, in this time, and in community, and do so in a way that calls me to pay attention to the day-to-day things, being present with you right now, paying attention to this, and the experience of being in relation to you, and doing so purposefully, and being in the present moment to start with. For me, I will say, I can get mired in the past and get stuck there, even though the importance of living three-dimensionally for me is important, recognizing where I come from, recognizing where I am now, and where I'm headed. But boy, for me, being in the present, I find that being in the moment and being present in the moment allows me to get to a contemplative space for the most part, and find meaning and joy in just being here and being here now. Life can be complicated. For me, living well also means, um, shutting down some of the background noise, trying to make sure that I keep focused on the signal, because there's a lot of noise out there. I'm not one to have the news on constantly and let social media dictate my thoughts and emotions, but I try to be present in the moment, and that for me, if I want to get to center, I get present pretty quickly. And if that means meditating to get there, if that means just standing still for a moment and just being in the moment, helps me center myself, which is important for me in these times at this point in my life.
Mm-hmm. I love how you centered living well around attentiveness and presence, and being here in each moment of our experience, because there's so much when we're present. There's so much happening, and when we can be distracted, not just from the external world, but we can be distracted from our own background noise in our minds, and like you said, in the past, we can get stuck there. Even if that past was yesterday, we can all get stuck. And when we're really present, there's so much available to us that we fail to recognize when we're entangled in the past, or we're entangled in all of the background noise, even in our own minds, not just the background noise of the media and all of those different things. And I hear that big time. I've been doing contemplative practice for quite a while now, and I still allow myself to get trapped into, or entangled into, the news. And the thing that got me was the cell phone. The iPhone, I just slide that thing over and I'm looking at the news and I just get caught up in it. And I know as I'm doing it, I'm like, this is going to take me out of my calm. It's going to take me out of my peace, because the media is designed to capture your attention, and the way we capture our attention is hijack that negativity bias that we have. And I know this, I'm conscious of this, and I keep telling myself, but I'm interested in knowing what's going on in the world and how the world works. And so it's just that delicate balance of being really present and not slipping into the background noise and letting it take away from all of that spaciousness and openness that's available to me in the present moment.
Roderick, I caught myself, and I walk into the university each day, so I live about a mile from the campus on which I work. And Seattle's weather is mild for the most part. We can walk year round, but for a couple of days. And I caught myself some time ago looking at my schedule on my phone, while I was walking. And I was looking at the names on my schedule and going, oh, I've got to have that meeting, and oh, I've got to meet with that person, and oh, I've got to meet. And by the time I got to campus, slightly less than a mile, I was exhausted. I was telling myself, oh my gosh, it's just going to be such a difficult day. And I paused for a second. I thought, Ed, you managed in 10 minutes to convince yourself that you're going to have a miserable day, and your day hasn't begun yet. It's 7, and the power of the brain. I had just got myself into a quagmire of a conversation where I just created this misery, and I myself did it. And so I thought, first of all, why would you do that to others? Because they're just names, they're just meetings, and you don't know how they're going to show up. But you just created a narrative about them that is in no way accurate and connected to who they are and where they are in this moment. So why would you do this to them? And why would you do this to yourself, to have created a moment where you're exhausted and ready to go home and go to bed when your day just started? And so I caught myself. And then as I was walking home, I thought, I'm gonna check myself a little bit. I'm gonna breathe a little bit. And I'm actually gonna just take a look at where I'm walking. And I'm walking, and it was a fall day. These giant leaves, and some of them were red, and some of them were green, some of them were still falling. And I would watch these leaves as they sort of circled their way down, and thought, that's a beautiful and amazing thing. And it turns out I get to walk over a bridge, a drawbridge, to get home. And I stood on that bridge, and there were rowers that are rowing boats, and they're just stroke by stroke by stroke. And it's just almost a meditative practice. And I would look, and I was just counting their strokes and seeing a person single scull in the water. And I think, I'm walking over a body of water, a lake that connects out to a sound that connects out to the ocean. And what a beautiful and majestic and amazing thing. And I'm walking over water. And so I've told myself now, when I'm walking and I'm looking at my calendar, Stop creating stories and narratives about people. No matter what you think of them, hold that narrative for a moment. And there's that judgmental thing. I had totally been in a space of judgmentalism, such that I had ruined my day before it began. I found myself sort of laughing out, like, look at what you created in a matter of 10 to 15 minutes. And so I thought, put your phone down, or if you need to hold your phone at the moment, go at it without judgment. That's just a 10 o'clock appointment, and go to that and be fair to the people and let them begin again each day. Begin each conversation like it's a first conversation, and let it evolve, rather than to judge people before you even walk into conversation with them. Because think about the kind of harm that it does when we start with judgment rather than opportunity to be in community with one another.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Ed. That's a great teaching right there. Just that, and just sharing your experience of how the chatter in our minds, how we can ultimately create suffering, takes us away from the all of that spacious beauty that's right there in each moment, and how we can traffic our minds and judgments and of our own creation. It's amazing how the mind works. And well, I guess this in the contemplative practice called monkey mind. This is why they call it monkey mind, people.
Exactly.
Is that your mind is, you can get, we can get all sucked up and caught up into foolishness of our own creation that
Right.
takes us away from the joy of the moment. And it also, it is fatiguing. It is very tiring. It's exhausting. just doing it ourselves.
It was actually kind of funny, because I thought, I'm ready to go home and take a nap. And I thought, well, Ed, you haven't even started the day yet, and you've gotten yourself to a place of exhaustion.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think sometimes we forget that, and what role we play in our own well-being, and how the processes of the mind, if we have no knowledge of how the mind works, or some kind of model. There are different models out there, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah,
different metaphors for it.
yeah,
But we have no knowledge of it. We allow ourselves to get caught up into all of this mess in our minds.
yeah.
And it creates, man, that's a good example of how that can happen in such a short period of time, and how it sets the tone for our day,
Mhm.
how it influences our interactions, our relationships. And we make judgments about things that has no basis. Now, there may be something in it, of course, there's something in it, but then our very creative minds come up with all these various fictions, and they're actually competitive fictions.
Mhm.
We have scenarios
Mhm.
about what could possibly happen, and all of that energy is used,
Yeah,
that is ultimately creating suffering, discomfort, dissatisfaction in ourselves.
right.
That's just shaping and influencing how we move through the day. And I love also how you said at the end of the day, you say, okay, let me do something different. I'm going to just pay attention to what is happening. And you just gave a good example, I think. You said that living well is paying attention, being attentive, being present, mindful. And then you just gave an example of why that influences living well, or how it can bring about joy, with that example of you going home, watching those leaves come down in the fall, walking over the bridge and seeing those people rowing their kayaks or canoes. I can't remember which one you said.
All the things.
Uh,
Yeah.
and just watching that and being present with that and seeing the rhythm of that movement, and what impact, the influence it had on your energy, your psychology, your emotional state. And I just think it's fascinating, because sometimes people may hear like, "Oh, be present, be in the moment," but why? But you just gave a clear example of why that is beneficial and why that supports a life well lived.
Yeah. Frederick, I like the example that you gave also of you called out monkey brain, because that's exactly what my head was just spinning and and judging. But the beautiful thing about certain practices that allow us to try to find our center. And I remember doing this meditation practice with Silkni Rinpoche, up in Dharamsala, up in India, Dharamsala. And he was teaching us to meditate, and said, you're going to get your brain's going to go to monkey brain. You're going to jump around. You're going to get distracted, and don't judge yourself for that, but
Mm-hmm.
just begin again. Just begin again. So if you get distracted and start thinking about pizza, begin again. And so the beauty of the redemptive part of this, which is, um, I did that. I can recognize that, not be judgmental about it, but just begin again. And I can recreate. I can even recreate my steps and say, let me begin this day again. Let me start over again, and even begin again in relation to people on that list who, as I'm looking at and going, oh, I've got a meeting with Broderick at lunch, and he's going to be upset and he's going to be bothered, and we're going to talk about budget stuff. Like, begin again. Start reframing what it is you're saying about people that is judgmental and even a form of othering, because that's a small thing to be upset at them before, but it's a bigger thing when you start framing them, naming them, problematizing them, and and creating distance between you and them before you even been in a space with them together. So you think about the problem of letting your mind tell you stories about people that can lead to othering, that can lead to very, very problematic behavior. So it's not a small thing to look at a name on a piece of paper and say, oh, there's so and so. This is what's going to happen. Like, that's very problematic, because you can't teach for equity and belonging, but actually be creating these narratives in your head and be doing and engaging the very othering that you're trying to teach about. So just deal with that yourself before you start teaching it in others.
Oh, this is so good, Ed. Just that example that you gave and how you're elaborating on it and showing us that what can happen again, how we can create suffering, the judgments, the othering. And I love how you just brought the example. You do work on equity and at the same time recognizing that, oh, I do this myself. Think we all do it. We all do it, folks. And that's why it's important. Again, you're this practical example of why there's value in cultivating and developing the capacity to be aware and sensitive to your own mind. Not just the external environment, that's important too, of course. I'm sure we may touch on that too. But just to be aware of our own minds, just to watch it and see it, and to learn not to allow our subconscious mind, which is where our programming is.
Yeah.
And it has to be, folks. I don't think it's inescapable. Imagine that you need to be consciously aware of every choice, every decision that you make. You'll go mad. So through evolution, we're not designed to do that. We're designed to have some programming under there that's kind of driving our behaviors and actions. And that programming is useful for our survival as a species, absolutely. And also there's a shadow side to it. And that shadow side, if we don't have the awareness, the sensitivity of that process, or the processes that are unfolding in our minds, we're insensitive to it. Most of us are. And this is what's shaping and molding our actions and behaviors. We can say one thing in one moment and completely do the opposite in the next, or completely be blind to our what's the word I'm looking for? Our the contradictions that we're making. What's the word when you say one thing and you do the opposite, but we're completely aware of it.
Yeah.
Unaware of it. Sorry, we're completely unaware of it. That's why I love that teaching of, even in that, I'm not saying you should judge yourself, like you said. Be careful with the mind again. It can trick you into judging yourself again. That's not the point. The point is to be aware, like you said, and start over. I just think about it, folks. What if Ed would have said at the end of his day, he would have been mad at himself, judging himself about not paying attention on his way to work, and about judging folks because those conversations went different than what he was thinking in his mind. Imagine on his way home, if he would have kept going down that path, he would not have enjoyed the beauty of those leaves falling, would not have enjoyed the beauty of the walking across that bridge and across that body of water. And if those of you, if you haven't been to Seattle, it is a beautiful place. I mean, it's stunningly beautiful. And what if Ed would have just been angry at himself on his way home? Would have missed out on that. And I think that this is such a practical example of the importance of presence. And I know I keep reiterating this, and the reason why I'm reiterating this is because sometimes when mindfulness got popular in the public, some people push it to the side. Academics, non-academics say, "Oh, that's just, you know, just paying attention to the present moment. That's just some old new age mumbo jumbo." And I'm like, no, this is just practical. And you gave a practical example of the importance and relevance of this type of thing.
I'll give another example, Broderick, one that changed me a few years ago, because you mentioned, and I'm not going to blame social media for everything, because ultimately we have some choices to make, and we have some control, and as responsible people, self-respecting people, we have some choices to make about how we are formed and shaped by social media. And it was in 2020 when George Floyd was killed and the pandemic was happening, and there was so much going on in our world, and it was an overwhelming time. Especially, it was particularly hard for people who look like me. It was hard to be in this space in that time. Hard to be Black in America, and but I realized that I had all these protests were happening in Seattle, in downtown Seattle. The city was actually downtown Seattle was actually burning. I could smell and see the smoke from where I was living, and so we were we were sheltered in place, and then we had gotten a warning that we should be that there was a curfew. So both were sheltering in place, and there was a curfew. You're not supposed to be outside. So I was sitting there, and I realized that I'd had my TV off and I'd had social media off for the most part, and but I thought, people are really angry at this moment, and what are they angry about? And I had not watched the video of George Floyd, and I intentionally did not watch it. So I picked up my phone, and I thought, I need to figure out why people are marching right now. So I pulled up some video, and there I watched a human being being killed,
Mm.
and it was so disturbing to me that I swiped with my thumb and switched over, and then I was watching like a dog show or something like that. Just some, and then I started thinking about the profundity of having an image in my hand of a human being killed. I watched the person take their last breaths, struggling for their last breaths. The thing that we hold so sacred, the act of breathing. And in a moment, I could actually swipe and then turn to something funny, turn to cat videos, turn to dog videos, turn to a basketball game or something. Um, and I thought about the power of the responsibility of both paying attention um, to the moment, but also paying attention to suffering. That it's not, and sometimes it's about joy, watching a leaf fall. Sometimes it's understanding and seeing and paying attention to what it means to be human and actually being empathic with suffering that's happening. But it brought me closer, and I wish it wasn't on my phone, on my cell phone, in a video that somebody happened to take, because we should not swipe left or swipe right and see people dying and see people take their last sacred breaths. Um, but I also realize that paying attention means paying attention to all aspects of what it means to be human, which is joy and beauty of a walk to work, but also suffering in our midst that allows us to be empathic, and then making some decisions about whether social media should be the place that draws our attention, or whether it's in relation to one another, and being empathic enough to actually ask questions about how are you today, Robert? What experience are you having? How is your mother? How's your brother? How's your life today? And to do that without the intermediary of social media. So that was a profound moment for me to think about how easy that comes to us, but also what it means to pay attention during these times, and pay attention to all aspects of it, to include um, times when we are not well, times when we are not suffering, times when others are suffering, that allows us to be really the gift of being humans and thoughtful humans, is that I can actually be in suffering with you. I can be present to you during these moments.
Mm. Beautiful, Ed. Ah, that's so good. Thank you for reminding us of that too. That yeah, it's not just attending to and just looking, because we think we just attending to the joyful moments or the peaceful moments. No, it's not just that. It's just attending to all of it, all aspects of what it means to be a human being. The human life is there's a spectrum in the human experience, from joy to sadness. We have a cornucopia of of emotions. It's not just 6 or 7. That's just 6 or 7 names that we give, but each one of us have a broad spectrum of emotional capacity, and we all experience those throughout our lives, and other people are experiencing those throughout their lives, and that attentiveness again can open the door for self-compassion. We can hold ourselves even where we're in moments of suffering, compassion towards others. We can hold that space for others, and just even empathy in itself, empathy and particularly cognitive empathy, being able to see the world through someone else's lenses, and that deepens our understanding. Again, this idea of mindfulness and presence, it's so important on so many levels, because it when we're really present, no matter what is happening, the suffering or the joyful moments, the painful or the joyful moments, um, it allows us to gain insight into joy, insight into suffering and pain. And with that insight, we can transmute that. We can take that insight and use it as fuel to help us clarify a vision of goodness in the world. It can help us live out goodness, well-being in the world. So I just think that's really, really important what you're bringing up here. And I think I'm excited that this just happened to come up in this conversation, because, again, a lot of people brush this mindfulness, present stuff to the side these days. And I'm like, no, there's a lot there.
Lot there. You have me thinking also, Broderick, just listening to you now. And I wonder if, even out of paying attention to some of the forms of suffering and embracing that and being present to some of that suffering, allows there to be forms of artistry. Right? So when I think about, and this is really just coming to, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about these things. Where does the blues come from? Where does gospel come from? If people don't embrace sadness, where does country music come from? If you don't embrace moments of sadness, all these breakup songs, they come from somebody paying attention to what it feels like to be sad in a moment, or what it feels like to hurt in a moment, what it feels like to rise up and be hopeful. So when you think about great art and great moments of creativity, perhaps much of that comes from experiencing suffering and harm, recognizing that and thinking about ways to move through and rise above and bridge across it all. So I even wonder if entire bodies of work are a creation of being attentive to the ways in which we struggle and suffer. I'll have to turn on some country music when I go home today to see it and be inspired by breakups and suffering and hardship.
Exactly. I think that there's so much. I'm glad you brought that up too, because there's so much beauty in that arises out of the ashes of suffering.
Yes.
There's just so much. Let's just do the blues. I can go back to the blues example. Man, the blues come out of a lot of suffering.
They come out a lot of suffering.
A lot of suffering. It's like, how do these people in the midst of that suffering can transmute that to something so beautiful?
Yeah.
And then from that beautiful music, that music has influenced music internationally.
Yeah.
In the United States, you've got jazz, rock
Yes.
and roll,
Yes.
R&B,
Yep.
even country music.
Yep.
It comes out of that blues tradition,
Yep.
bluegrass. It's all intertwined, interlinked.
Yep.
And, I think that there's something there. And I think as an example, it reminds us to take a look at our suffering. And then what can we learn from that suffering, and how can we use that as a means to create something beautiful in our lives?
Wonderfully said. I love that.
Yeah, and I think that's just nature has shown us that. History shows us that. Now, folks, we're not saying go out there and create suffering for yourself so you can make something beautiful. Suffering is like the Buddha said. Suffering is inevitable. Don't worry. The goal is still to minimize unnecessary suffering, but you will find pain in your life, moments of pain and discomfort and dissatisfaction. It will happen. It's just that when those moments arise, how can you take that and transmute it into something beautiful?
I love that.
So you said something earlier also that that I want to make sure we touch on this conversation where you spoke about education and you spoke about your experience. You subtly talked about how important it was to explore certain texts and these texts particularly about the what exploring the question that I've posed to you in this podcast. This whole podcast is about. And by the way, it's definitely influenced by the Platonic Socratic dialogues.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not doing what Socrates does. That can be quite annoying. It's different than that. But the idea of sitting down and having conversations about these big questions of meaning and significance in life, and you can have that conversation with a text, some text of someone written thousands of years ago, and you can have that conversations with others in as you explore that text. So can you say something about that and the importance of that in I know it's a big question, but say something about that and the importance of that in education.
I was fortunate enough to, along the way, every now and then encounter these teachers that connected with me in some way and challenged me to just think different, to think bigger. And it started with a connection, and then it started with questions and maybe bodies of literature and such. And that my first really great teacher was Miss Jackson, who was a Black woman who was a dear friend of my mother's. And I learned from her in part because of her friendship with my mother. There's connectivity, which is amazing because my elementary school was down the street from my house, and her house was down the block from my mother's house. So on her way home, she would drop by my house and sit and have coffee with my mother. She was like breaking that sacred line that teachers and principals should not be breaking. It's like, wait a minute, this is my home. When I go to school, you're supposed to be there, but you shouldn't be at my coffee table. Like, could you please go away? But she would notice me, and she would ask me questions. Have you done your homework? And have you done this? And she would ask me those questions during a time when my family was often struggling. So the lights would be out in the house. We'd lose power. And not because of the weather, just because we couldn't afford to pay the light bill. And she'd still look over at me and say, have you done your homework? And I go, Miss Jackson, I'm sitting here with a candle. And it's not the 18th century. And she'd go, well, go do your homework anyway. You have a candle, don't you? And I'd be like, and she would just raise this expectation. Like she would just sort of turn the light on and keep going, light a match and keep moving. She did this beautiful job of just inspiring me to sort of keep step by step by step. I'm going to shine a light and you just need to follow along. And it was a beautiful way of just being educated to move forward. And then I had teachers along the way, by the time I got to college, that would put big questions in front of us. I mentioned when I got there was this book that one of my professors, it was a book by theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. The book was called Letters and Papers from Prison. And I just, for the life of me, couldn't understand it because I hadn't read any books in high school. And this book was about a German theologian who had plans to kill Hitler, right? And he was discovered, he was put in prison. So he's writing from prison, much like Martin Luther King was writing from jail. And he was writing about freedom. And I couldn't understand what he was writing. And there was a point at which I did two things. I would go to my dorm room and pray that if there is a God, that they would intervene and sort of get me through this time of crisis. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Help me not fail this class. Well, the whole premise of Bonhoeffer's book was that if there is a God, that God doesn't work deus ex machina, come and get you during times of crisis. It doesn't come out of the woodworks and rescue you. You got to figure your way out of this stuff. I mean, you got yourself in it, and you got to get yourself out of it, and you got to be responsible. And he's writing from prison also, and he's saying basically that even though I'm behind bars, my mind is still liberated. And so I stepped back from this book and I started thinking, okay, so Bonhoeffer's asking me just to be responsible. So I'm in a crisis right now, and I want someone to come and save me, but I've got to figure this out, lesson number one, which I've done most of my life at this point as an 18-year-old. And secondly, he's asking me to imagine people being imprisoned behind bars and struggling for some sort of liberation of the mind. Now, in my little town, there's a big federal prison there. And my mother used to go in and sing in her choir in the prison. So I got to know some people that were imprisoned. And So I have something to say about prisons, and I have something to say about people behind bars, and the struggle for liberty and the liberation of the mind and things like that. So I found myself saying, these are questions that we should all be struggling with. And what does it mean to be free? Even if we're restricted by how much money we have, even if our ability to move around is restricted, do we still have forms of liberty? These are things that we should all be thinking about. What does it mean to move forward even though we can't see what's ahead of us? Are there people who can kind of light the path for us, and do we trust them? And what does it mean to be in relationship to people? So for me, education was in relationship to people around questions that mattered in my life and in our life. And they were big philosophical questions, but they were also really practical. What does it mean for me to go down the block to the prison and talk to men who look like me and and hold them in respect and regard and have a position on what does it mean to be a nation that imprisons more people than any place in the world? And is that what constitutes freedom? Is that democracy? But these are the things that, and you said you appreciate Plato. Um, for Plato, virtue had something to do with just knowledge, just understanding, and that knowledge can come from a number of places. It can come from a conversation that you have with someone who's behind bars. It can come from somebody who works behind a check stand. It can be someone who works in Carol's restaurant. But that knowledge, and it can come from a philosophical text. But knowledge is important to live good and meaningful lives, and um, and so that's the struggle of always being educated. So you started by saying that you're an educator, and you described being in conversation, in relationship with people around things that matter in the world. And so for me, education is an ongoing process, and it happens through the entirety of our lives as well, from how we learn how to form languages and form sentences to learning how to end life well. So for me, it's the joy and beauty of a process in relationship with others around questions, around issues that expand our minds, that deepen and enrich our lives, and hopefully make for a better world.
Mm. Amen to that. I love it.
A lot of mumbo jumbo. I'm sorry to say all of that, but it's connected
Uh,
to the people that have inspired me that matter, and and also put big philosophical questions. And sometimes that's in a literary tradition, and sometimes that's in the practical act of a woman who lived up the street and just asked, "Have you done your work today?"
exactly, Ed. Exactly. I think I just love that. I love that here you are working in an educational institution, a major university in this country, and you still have this, I dare say, this foundational perspective of education, and where education is about expansion of our awareness and the acquisition of knowledge through wrestling with a subject, whatever that subject is. The fact that this lady says, "Have you done your homework?" And you're like, "Well, we don't have any lights. There's a candle." You have to wrestle with that, and you're just like, "Well, you got a light. Go like take a match, light the candle. You can still do your homework." That inspiration that from her, not inspiration, that push, that nudge from her, inspired you to wrestle with that.
Yeah.
Why is this lady, and even if you didn't consciously do this, but why is she encouraging me to
Yeah.
do my homework even when we don't have power? This must be really important. There's something that she's trying to stress to me about education and about learning. And you have to wrestle with that. You have to wrestle with the text, with someone expressing their opinion. And especially when you write a text that's well thought out, they've really thought about it, and you really get to enter their minds and explore what it is that they have to say that they've really uh, worked out, at least they're thinking about. And it forces us to reflect ourselves. And education requires that reflection. And I love that you're talking about this because for me, I lament a lot of what is happening in our educational system, particularly universities. I often tell people I have a Ph.D. in chemical engineering, and I rarely took classes where I had to wrestle with those deep questions, particularly in science. Of course, I had an English class when I first got there, and I wrestled with it a little bit. But for me, I just don't understand why we don't emphasize this type of education, and our educational system is primarily focused on vocational education. And if you want to do the things that you're talking about, you need to go to a liberal arts school. And then people telling you it's a waste of time to go to a liberal arts school. I'm like, this is so backwards.
Yeah.
This is so backwards. And I think that what is happening in our society with the excessive polarization. Polarization is going to exist. That can be a healthy form of polarization, but there's an unhealthy amount of polarization in our society, and I think a lot of it has to do with how we've been educated. Have we been taught to do what you said? Have we been taught to be reflective and to wrestle with ideas and have conversations and be open to different interpretations and sit down and having a conversation, a cooperative conversation that can be competitive in the sense that it's, we're trying to figure out what each other's viewpoints, and I'm going to stress my viewpoint, but I'm also going to try to shed the light on where I'm coming from. And in the process, I want to see where you're coming from and how you've come to that decision. And if we're not doing that, and if we're not being taught to do that, well, this is what you should expect. You should expect a society that's highly polarized,
Right.
And that can ultimately destroy the society or the community or the family, the friendship.
Right.
If we're not taught these basic fundamental schools, that is the foundation of education. Period. I think. I don't know. That's my opinion. You're the provost of education. I don't
Well,
know.
Rebecca, I like what you just said, and you called out and you problematized polarization, which I think is right, because polarization gets me on one side and you on another, and us arguing our respective positions and not, and stuck in our trenches in a non-productive political discourse. So polarization is problematic, but the tension is not. So I'm in a building right now, as are you, and the tension is what's holding this building, holding the walls together. It's easy, and that tension is fine. So, if I'm in a community and we're having a discussion about how to build a facility for um, a youth prison, for example, and you want to talk about sort of the best kind of facility and where to put it. The tension that we need is, why are we building a youth prison? And someone needs to say, well, what's the problem that we're trying to address? Well, crime has gone up, so therefore we need to build a bigger prison so we have the capacity to hold more people. Well, why is crime going up? And so we need these tensions where we're in this conversation. What is a youth prison? What does it mean to send youth into incarceration? Let's have a tension. Let's hold this. And polarization is not helpful in that moment, but a certain conversation about these tensions around, why is there increasing crime? Well, what's going on? Is this the right solution? How do we hold these tensions and have productive and deep and thoughtful engagement that has at the end recognizing the humanity of others and holding the sanctity of youth and childhood? How do you change language? What happened in a discourse that allowed you to change the language from youth, calling people children on one moment, and then calling them adults and putting them in adult prison? There's a tension there that we just have to be able to be thoughtful and engage in a critical way and holding that tension. But polarization doesn't help in those moments. Think about the political discourse now. But holding that tension and looking squarely at each other and saying, let's get clear about what the problem is, and let's think about a thoughtful solution that is humane. And that means difficult and hard, attentive conversations that don't go to polarization, but go to what I hope would be solutions that get to a common humanity. So I love the way you framed the distinction between polarization and holding tensions, which we're capable of dealing with as people in community together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, that's how we got here evolutionarily.
Mm-hmm.
We've had what distinguishes humans from other animals is this capacity to you engage in language, and that language is centered around conversation and dialogue.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those in that conversation, those dialogues have projected us to where we are today. And I think sometimes we forget that. Now that's just like focusing on how we got here as a species. We focus on only on the tools.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the tools. It wasn't just fire. We had to cooperate. We had to communicate with each other for the hunt. We had to safeguard each other. You need to be able to tell the other person that, hey, there's a tiger over there. Be careful when you go down that path.
Yeah.
Okay, let's coordinate together so we can go out and get our food for the week or whatever it may be. We've had to cooperate. It wasn't merely competition and competing who can make the best tool for the community. That's not how we got here. And I think that, yes, I do feel like it's important to emphasize development of the sciences and our capacity to minimize suffering through the development of technology, etc. Absolutely. I'm not opposed to that at all.
Mhm.
Yet, because like you say, the example of a prison, we can build a nice prison where the facility is such that no one can escape. That could be the mentality. We can use fascinating technology. We can have all kinds of technology with cameras and sensors everywhere. That can be the focus.
Yep.
But it's like you said, hold on for a minute, folks. That's fine. If you're going to have a prison, you want the finest technology that can minimize someone breaking out of that prison to go out and harm society. If that's what your thinking is, absolutely okay to go there, I think. But the elephant in the room, why are we building a prison in the first place? What are leading these young people to engage in this activity? And what can we do as a culture, not just as a society, but as a culture, and with a set of agreed upon ideas about how to live?
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't even evaluate that culture, there's, to me, that is rooted in inadequacy in our education.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something went wrong in teaching me how to be a human being in relationship to other human beings, because I don't know how to have that question. I didn't even think about why these young people are in this situation and what we can do to mitigate that, mitigate these young people engage in activities that can lead them into these institutions, such as prison, of course.
You connected something else for me, which was is there concentric circles, that the mind and the wellness of the mind and the intersection with the body, the mind and body, in relationship to others. Those are kind of three concentric circles. So there is no self outside of relation to others, because we're kind of dependent on each other. She used that ancestral. I don't want to be walking in the world alone, having survived and figured out how to make sure that myself and that I am free and safe. But our villages were interdependent places where we needed each other to keep safe. Somebody who stays up at night, along with those people that are active in the morning, and along with those people who have basic tools and who can keep a community together. So what it means to be in relationship to one another and in community. And so to your initial question about a good and meaningful life, it's a good and meaningful life in relation to you. It's a good and meaningful life in relation to others. It's one that can imagine what safety and well-being looks like in community together, and how we get there in unison. And that's meaningful and good work, mind, body, in relation to each other, in relation to our communal destiny, tied together in some way. We go up together, we go down together. I'm appreciating your framework, Broderick.
Oh, you too, and you're inspiring. This is the kind of conversation I really love, because I'm just thinking of so many things here to reflect on, to think about, and how we word things slightly different. And I think, the conversation that we're having is the goal again is to inspire reflection. I'm inspired. I'm reflecting right now as I'm having this conversation, as I'm listening to you. And I'm hoping that the audience, are reflecting and thinking about these things. It's not about agreeing with us. It's just dealing with it, exploring these ideas and playing with them, and challenging them, and play with disagreeing with them, and see where you disagree, why you disagree, see where you agree and why you agree. That can lead to solutions to various issues and concerns that we have as a community. And I love, as we come to the close here, how you brought up that there is no me without you. And I think that I really mean that. And I think if you really think about it, you see the truth in that. That it's hard to see yourself without context. where I am Broderick within the context of a culture, the culture, my familial culture, the greater culture that I live in, the global culture. I am this Broderick that I identify with, that is being influenced and shaped by everything that I come into contact with. It's being influenced and shaped by the events that are going on across the globe. All of that is informing who I am. Now, I might not quite completely understand how that is in this moment, but as time goes along, what's going on across the globe is going to influence the market. That market is going to have an influence on the very culture that I live in, because I live in a globalized market, an international market. And all of these different factors are impinging on this idea of Broderick. And it is important for us, as we reflect on what a good life is, or what living well is, even as I'm really present and engaged in what is happening in my moment-to-moment experience, can I see my interconnectedness, as Thich Nhat Hanh say, my interbeing with all things? How can I see that interdependency they speak of, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism? That how can we think about that interdependency and reflect on that interdependency, and how does that influence my choices, my actions? Okay, where are my choices and actions coming from? It's coming from my knowledge base. It's coming from the language game that I have, the story that I've been telling myself. Well, where does that story come from? That story comes from my interactions within the context of the world that I find myself in.
Yep.
And if we're going to live a good life, whatever that means, I don't know, we all have to explore it. We have to contend with the complexity of what it means to be a human being, and recognize that we're in this thing together, whether we like it or not. We are in this thing together as a family. And I just pray that we can see it that way more. I pray that more of us can see it that way. And I think having conversations, contending with these big ideas, like what does living well mean? People, I don't know what it means. Okay, then welcome to the club. Let's explore it. And I think it's so important that we do these types of things. I have another quick question for you. As a provost, a dean of students, how does this, if you can say anything about it, how does this influence your relationship to students that you, I don't know exactly what you do, but I can imagine that you're doing something with helping these kids, young folks, project into their future. How do you plant the seeds of what you've been talking about in them through your role as a provost?
That's a lovely question. It's such inspiring work to be in. First of all, to be around lots of young people that they do represent the next generation. For me, I'm mindful of the three dimensions again, that they are of my past, of the current moment, and imagining a future. Without putting too much pressure on this generation, we are actually involved in work that we are calling next generation work. What are the habits of mind and the habits of heart that this generation will need to develop, and how do we help them develop? That's beyond whether you major in computer science or major in engineering or major in that. That's all relevant and important, but it's that habits of mind and heart. And when you look at the political discourse of the moment and some of the challenges, these are, in some cases, highly educated people that haven't figured out how to talk to one another, or still haven't figured out how to resolve problems without reverting to missiles and death and destruction. We've got environmental challenges that need serious and thoughtful engagement and solution, some of which are products of our own making. We've got social problems which are products of our own making as well. So preparing this generation to do just what we've been talking about, which is to not become polarized or cynical in this moment, but to be well in themselves and to be well in relation to one another, and to see the interconnection, and to imagine a next generation that actually begins to engage in reconciliation and restoration, whether that's in our environment, whether that's in relationship with one another, and coming up with new ways of being in relation to one another, but also new ways of being in tension with one another, new ways of even disagreeing with one another that doesn't involve eliminating or destroying the other. So these notions, John Powell's notion of coming to having a vision of belonging. What does it mean to create communities where, by virtue of being here, we belong? And that includes the environment as well. So we've got inspiring and important work to do to get to the complexity of the issues that we're dealing now. What inspires me is that these are students that have access to knowledge, they have access to technologies, they have access to resources that allow us to do remarkably good things. And here's that ethical, and there's that question about virtue. Because we're capable of doing certain things, should we do them? Because we have the technology to do them. So being in that space of holding that tension, and being of clear mind and clear thought as best we can, and being healthy. We're also talking about a generation of people that are dealing with stress and issues that have challenged them. So we're doing a lot of work on this campus with my colleagues around principles of wellness and compassion, irrespective of your major. That learning how to be well in community with one another is actually important, and there are a set of practices and habits, and being intentional is something that we as a university can be a part of. And so I'm mindful that there's a bit of a generation gap now because hey, I'm growing up in the Lawrence Welk moments in time and the the Motown era, and this is a hip hop era. We still need to be in conversation with one another. So that too was inspiring for me to be in a conversation with a generation of people that represent promise and opportunity and hope that inspires me day to day.
Ed, that's wonderful. The University of Washington is lucky to have you. Those kids are lucky to have you. And yeah, I'm so happy you're doing it. That's just really touching. That makes me so happy and gives me hope that you all are trying to nurture the hearts and minds of these kids and getting them to beyond their degree to do the work that that I think that we're talking about. You know, what is well-being? Challenging them to explore that and take care of that. And yeah, I'm glad you brought up the discussions, our lack of capacity to have meaningful dialogue. And it saddens me that young people, it's hard for them to do it. Good. I think a lot of people coming from a good place. Again, I just think that we need more of what you're doing and what the University of Washington doing that to prepare these kids to deal with the challenging situations that they find them. They're going to find themselves in inevitably, but have they've cultivated the habits of mind and habits of the heart to allow them to have those challenging conversations that's going to be inevitable in their lives. Well, we're at the end here, and I like to ask a final question here. Are there any final words that you have for the audience that you'd like to share?
I had an opportunity this last year to be a part of a community choir. There's a teacher in our community who teaches elementary kids, and she decided to have a community choir, which was to get as many people who were interested in singing together. And no matter the ability to sing, no matter your experience in singing. So I said yes to this opportunity to join a choir of people from professionals to young kids. So there were 10-year-olds in the choir, there were 70-year-olds in the choir, there were people who never sang together. And there were 100 of us who learned how to sing different songs. And then we came together as a large choir and we sang together. That exercise of being in community with people and using our voices together and being in sync together. It's a powerful thing when you're learning to try to find the same note, that your heart starts to actually beat together. You begin to sync your mind and heart a bit together as you're trying to get in rhythm together. And there were times there were some songs that would call us to sway to the left and sway to the right. We would sing together and just be swaying. And I'd look around and I think we're all singing together and we're moving together. And these are people that I don't know. And I'm just getting to meet. And And here's an elementary school teacher who has us, who's out and she's conducting us all to sing together, and 100 people. And it's inspiring for me to think about what's in front of us if we can actually get in rhythm together, if we can find our voices together, if we can sing together, if we can get our heartbeats to come in alignment and move from polarization to synchrony. So I was able to witness a really powerful opportunity. It didn't matter what you did professionally. It didn't matter what age you were, that we can come together with a common goal of just trying to make music together. I know this seems like a really simple kind of metaphor, but I'll tell you, it changed those of us that sang together. We got to get up on a stage and sing, and we hugged each other afterwards thinking, we need more of this. We need more of it.
Oh, what a great way to end this conversation, Ed. We need each other. We need more love and tenderness with each other, engaging in singing and movement and flow. This has been a great conversation. You have a lot of wisdom to share, and I would love to pick your brain. What do you say?
It's a pleasure being with you, and I know dear friends in common who love you dearly, so thank you for the opportunity to sit with you, brother.
Oh, you too, my brother. I'm just happy that you decided that you were open to having this conversation with me and sharing your wisdom with the world here. And it's out there in the public domain. It will be in the public domain. And I'm excited that more get to hear your voice and also be inspired and be hopeful about our educational system when we got people like you in there trying to nurture and support the young people forward. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.